Joe Madden was the guy that broke the curse as the Cubs skipper. We're going to talk Joe Madden, and we're going to talk a lot of baseball here, Cubs baseball, with our good buddy Bruce Miles, who got together with Jesse Rogers and wrote a book about the Cubs that I think you guys are going to want to check out. But before we do anything else, welcome to the Cubs baseball channel. I'm Mick Gillispie, and to be part of the channel, to be on our roster, it's really simple. Like and subscribe, and it's free. Well, Bruce, it's always great to see you and to talk Cubs baseball. And let's talk some Joe Madden. I was there when Joe was building the Cubs into a World Series champion. You were there too. I mean, we used to talk about it in spring training. He brought this energy that I love, just a great sense of humor. And he eventually helped the Cubs in 2016 do what a lot of us thought was impossible. What was it like to write a book and talk about that?
Well, I'll tell you, Joe Madden is one of my favorite managers and favorite people to have covered in all of the years I covered baseball. He is well-read. He has interests outside of baseball. And I think the biggest thing he did with the Cubs in 2015 is he changed the culture and got them to believe that they could win and got them to believe that they could beat the St. Louis Cardinals. I think those are the biggest contributions. You know, Joe gets a lot of heat for the way he handled pitchers during the 2016 World Series, especially in games 6 and 7. But I think what people forget is that the Cubs were down 3-1 in that World Series. They were left for dead. Joe was the same guy before and after every game of that World Series. In other words, he never panicked, so the Cubs never panicked. He always said, I treat every game the same, whether it's March 15th in spring training, April 15th, July 15th, or October 15th. And I really do think that was an unsung part of why the Cubs were able to hang on in that World Series and eventually come back and win it.
The book's called The Franchise, and it's a lot about the Cubs and their history. Well, all about the Cubs and their history. And Bruce, you got together with Jesse Rogers to write that. How do you guys work in tandem? And we're going to get into more stories in the book, but what's that experience like? Because we love Jesse, ESPN 1000 in Chicago, covers MLB for ESPN. Great baseball guy. You were with the Dailey Harold for a long time. You've been around the game forever. How did you guys end up teaming up?
Well, it was a great partnership, first of all. It was in the spring of a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago in the spring. Jesse called me and he said, I have a project here, but I need help on it. I'm writing a Cubs book and I need you to write some chapters, and you can write about any aspect of Cubs history that you want. So that really appealed to me, being a lifelong resident of either Chicago or the Chicago area, somebody who went to his first Cubs game in 1962, and somebody who covered the Cubs for 22 years. So I jumped on board right away. We divvied up the chapters, and I did 9 or 10. Jesse did 4 or 5. It's a fun read, but the partnership was really great and really cooperative.
Well, you wrote about some of the Cubs managers. I became a Cubs fan in '84. Going way back. I'm aging myself. I know that most people watching couldn't believe that. But yeah, I became a fan in '84, right? Sandberg and Jody Davis and that crew, Sarge on there as well, Bobby Dernier. And I loved some of the managers over the years. Don Baylor was one of my favorite Cubs managers. Zim was one of my favorites as a kid. I used to cut school to see those Cubs teams. Harry Carey calling the action. What are some of the things you learned, writing chapters about some of the former Cubs managers?
It was interesting because I wrote about 3 of them specifically, the big name managers they hired over the last 20 years or so: Dusty Baker, Lou Piniella, and Joe Madden. And I found that, each one brought a lot of different things to the table. I think that Joe Madden and Dusty Baker are quite a bit alike in that they both have a lot of interests outside of baseball. They like music, they like reading, they like cars. Whereas Lou brought that kind of old-time passion to the game. He really did mellow in his later years, where he wasn't throwing bases or kicking his cap around the field. But in some of the other chapters, I also talked with Jim Riggleman, who is the manager.
Riggs.
in 1998 when Kerry Wood burst onto the scene and when Sammy Sosa hit 20 homers in June and then went on to the historic home run duel with Mark McGwire. But Jim Riggleman, an interesting guy because the year before in 97, he sat Sammy Sosa down at the end of the season and reprimanded him when he thought Sammy did something wrong on the bases. So Jim earned a lot of respect that way. It's a shame he didn't have better teams to manage over the years because I thought he was a great in-game manager, always treated the media great. So I talk about different managers and their styles and their personalities in the book. And it's really fun to go back. Part of the book is a memoir for me because I did cover all of these guys and I wanted the perspective of time and distance a little bit to talk about, what their legacies might be.
Yeah, you talked about three guys I met. Lou Piniella, what an interesting cat, he was. Got him late in his managing career, but you're talking about a baseball lifer. And really, to me, always a very genuine guy.
Oh, always. And he managed in New York, as you well know, played for the Yankees, managed the Yankees. I believe he was the GM of the Yankees for a while, but he had never seen anything like the Cubs experience. There was a game in April of his first year, 07, afternoon game, a lot of people in the stands, and the place was going nuts. Lou looked like, deer in the headlights because he'd been in New York and experienced all that pressure, but never anything like Chicago. He goes, this is a different animal you got here. This is no push button operation. So I think he was quite taken aback early about the passion of Cubs fans. And it took that team, the 07 team, a while. They were almost 10 games under 500 in late May. And Lou rallied them, had a big argument at third base against when the Cubs were playing the Braves with the umpire over a play that was disputed. And that kind of kick-started the Cubs. They went on to win 2 straight divisions under Lou. Unfortunately for them, they couldn't quite get over the hump and get to the World Series. But my goodness, he brought a lot of passion, a lot of fire, and really a lot of knowledge. Lou knew who could play. He knew who couldn't play. He knew who would play. He knew who wouldn't play. And he really gave chances to people like Ryan Theriot in 07 and 08, and to people like Giovanni Soto as a rookie untested. So really, Lou was the entire package, liked his veterans, liked his hitters, didn't understand pitchers too well, but gave young people a chance and was really good for this team.
Yeah, I was talking about him on this channel a couple weeks ago when Alexander Canario got called up, because if a young player got called up, Lou Piniella seemed to get them in the game very quickly. They didn't want them to sit on the bench and think about not playing.
Well, yes. And one of the things in his job interview, when he talked with general manager Jim Hendry and the president of the team at the time, John McDonough, he said, I will play young players. Mm-hmm. One of the criticisms of his predecessor, Dusty Baker, is that Dusty didn't like young players. Well, that's somewhat unfair because Dusty always said, well, get me some good ones and I'll play them. But Lou was very committed to that. And one of the first people that he plugged in was Ryan Theriot at shortstop after he grew disenchanted with Cesar Izturis. Lou gave this kid a chance. He said, son, you're going to play shortstop. And Theriot had a couple of good years with the Cubs. But, yeah, Lou was good to his word on that.
Talking with Bruce Miles about the new book. It's called The Franchise, and it's all about the Chicago Cubs. We're talking managers right now. There's a chapter in the book about managers. And then I want to touch on Dusty Baker, and then we'll move on to something else. But I think of Dusty, first off, just having been around him, he's a great guy. He's really funny, off the field, laid back guy. Finally got the World Series after so many heartbreaks, including with the Cubs. And we all know about the worst Cubs heartbreak in playoff history. Did you have a chance, or did you bring that up when you talked to him and wrote the book?
Well, I've talked to him many times since then. And one of the things I think we all know what we're talking about, 03, games 6 and 7, the Cubs had a 3-1 series lead against the Marlins, and game 6 came along, and you know what happened? The play down the left field line, and then they lost game 7 with Kerry Wood on the mound. One of the things Dusty got criticized for a lot then was his handling of pitchers Kerry Wood and Mark Prior.
Right.
What people don't know is that Kerry Wood has said, I would go through a wall for Dusty Baker. And when Dusty would come to town as the manager of the Reds, Kerry and Dusty would have these long chats behind the batting cage and talk. And Mark Prior, when he was near the end of his career, he called Dusty in Cincinnati and said, Dusty, can you get me another shot, even if it's an invite to spring training? Dusty was a player's manager. Players would go through a wall for Dusty Baker. And I think that over the years, Dusty has really evolved as a manager, where he's more in tune now with some of the analytics and the sabermetrics of the game, where before, he kind of poo-pooed those notions. But I think that he was a Hall of Fame manager before he won the World Series in Houston. I definitely think he's one now, and I hope he gets there soon, and I hope he gets to enjoy it for a lot of years.
What's really cool about this book is that it's part of a series, a franchise series with some of the great teams in baseball, the Yankees and the Red Sox, and then having you and Jesse Rogers write about the Cubs. I think the perfect fit when you talk about two guys that have covered the team for a long time and are very fair, too. Both of you guys are very fair. Not everyone in the media is fair when it comes to the way that they view history. I'm sure that's probably why he reached out to you.
Yeah, Jesse and I have known each other for a long time. And the interesting thing about the two of us is that, one, we both didn't have to, now, so to speak, book learn anything about the Cubs, even though we're writing a book here, because we grew up with it. You were about the same age. I started going to Cubs games in the early 60s. I'm sure Jesse was a couple of years after that. But the other thing is, we both came up kind of what I call the right way. We paid our dues in the business. I covered a lot of high school sports. I worked on the copy desk before I got anywhere near a major league beat. And I think that's really important. And Jesse was a radio producer in Chicago, working with a lot of big names, booking guests, trying to get people on the show, which is not the easiest thing to do. But Jesse is never one. He always leads with his chin. He'll always, take one for the team. And he never says no. If somebody says, I don't want to do the interview or I don't want to come on, he'll go, come on, we got to do this. So that's, I think, one of the reasons the partnership worked. And I think that if you read the book, I think you see the base of knowledge, if I do say so myself, and the fact that, we are kind of imbued with Chicago sports.
Yeah, look, when I got to start doing spring training on Cubs.com and MLB.com, I worked with Len Casper, still one of the great voices in the game. And I hope he doesn't get mad at me for saying this. I'm sure he won't. He said right off the bat, Bruce Miles, great guy. He's someone that you need to get to know and learn from, And so for me, just a young broadcaster, I'm trying to talk to you guys and just learn about the team and the franchise, because there's a different perspective that you have as a fan than as a media person, right? When you're covering the team every day. How did you get to that point in your career where you went from someone growing up in Chicago to becoming a fan or becoming a media person from a fan?
Well, I think one of the first things you learn or should learn as a journalist is that when you start covering a beat, whether it's a news beat or a sports beat or a team, is that you have to check your fandom at the door when you walk into the ballpark, and you have to report on what's going on, whether it's positive or negative. I mean, it was very nice that you said those things. What I tried to be was fair. I had a Cubs coach come up to me one time and say, we don't always agree with what you write, but we'll always talk with you because you're fair. And I took that as, I was very flattered by that, because that's what I tried to be. I never tried to take cheap shots or get personal with anybody. Remember, the Cubs had Rod Beck. My first year was 98. Rod Beck came over from the Giants, and he talked to us about a lot of things. And he goes, you know what? If I'm terrible, say I'm terrible, but just don't get personal. So
Yeah.
that was my approach all those years. And my other approach was, and it's nice that you said so, but I always wanted to treat younger people in the business well, so that they would come up and be better than us. And if they wanted to take my job and they were good enough, fine. And I still have that approach. If somebody is an intern or a college radio person or college journalist, I try to help them out as much as I can, show them the ropes, and treat them with respect, because that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, it's fun talking about this book. Let's get into another subject that you liked writing about. What's something else that you wrote about in this book that you felt like this was really fun?
Well, for me, the biggest chapter in the book was Sammy Sosa.
Mm.
And as we tape this today, it's the 25th anniversary of him hitting home runs number 61 and 62 in 1998 to tie Mark McGwire for the lead in that historic race. What I wanted to get to was, what is his legacy? As you know, Sammy didn't make the Hall of Fame. He has not been invited back by the Cubs. I'm hoping that changes one of these days. But what is his legacy? People talk about the so-called steroid era. Did he or didn't he? I don't know. We don't know. We can all have our suspicions on that. But I wanted to get to what his legacy was. The biggest thing I learned in that, right, in researching that chapter, is that you cannot talk about Sammy Sosa with the Cubs without talking about him with the White Sox. The Cubs got Sammy from the White Sox. Well, the White Sox had a GM named Larry Himes, who later went to the Cubs. He saw Sammy in Texas, made a trade, Harold Baines for Sammy Sosa. It nearly wrecked relationships in the White Sox organization, including general manager, because Harold Baines was so revered with the White Sox among players, coaches, and so forth. Scouts were asked to put their jobs on the line. Would you put your job on the line to trade for Sammy Sosa? They did. Larry Himes gets fired by the White Sox, goes to the Cubs, trades for Sammy Sosa, trades George Bell to the White Sox for Sammy Sosa. So there are so many layers to the Sammy Sosa story. And when we talk about things like 1998, people seem to enjoy it. I remember I'm watching the tapes today of him hitting those home runs. The place was packed. People were going crazy. And it's a shame that he's still not been welcomed back by the Cubs. But I give them an off-ramp in this book, and you want to pick up the book to see it. The Cubs have their own Hall of Fame now. Sammy's not going to make Cooperstown, I don't believe, but the Cubs have their own Hall of Fame. If he gets elected to that, I think the Cubs have no other choice but to bring him back. And then owner Tom Ricketts can say, hey, listen, I didn't want to, but this independent committee voted him in, so Sammy's got to come back. So I think it's a win-win for everybody. And it's interesting how polarizing Sammy is. Some people think he should be in the Hall of Fame. Some think he shouldn't. And the debate will go on forever, probably.
Yeah, look, we've broached that on this channel before. I know about Sammy. I mean, I can tell you that he didn't leave the organization with a lot of people feeling warm and fuzzy. We talked to Ron Coomer, who played with Sammy, and he talks about all the things that Sammy did that the media didn't see, and the stress that went with it. I just feel like, Bruce, it's time to forgive. And I've said that, and I didn't feel this way 5 years ago, but I feel like that now. And you're right. And we'll get comments from people that say, no way. And then we'll get comments from people that say, bring him back. And a lot of comments in Spanish from people in the Dominican that love Sammy Sosa and would love to see him back with the Cubs. And I think that it just comes down to Tom Ricketts and Sammy Sosa somehow just getting together. Tom's a great guy. I know him. You know him too. He's an awesome guy. And I don't know that it would take a whole lot other than let's go have a drink and figure this out. Because I think that if Sammy came back to the Cubs convention or to, like you said, the Cubs Hall of Fame, we have so many great memories of Sammy Sosa. 9/11's anniversary was this week. One of the worst days in my life. And I'm sure a lot of you feel exactly the same way that I do. And I'll never forget Sammy Sosa running out there with those American flags. It meant a lot to me. Forget about the baseball part of it. But he hit a lot of home runs. And there were just some awesome days of watching Harry Carey on television and Chip and all, you know what I mean? It's just like there's so much besides the bad at the end that we've got to remember. And there were just some great moments with Sammy. I'd love to see him back.
Yeah, and I think the door is open in another front, too, because a week or so ago, the Cubs had Carlos Zambrano out at the park. Now, he's been out many times, but they had him sing the seventh inning stretch, Take Me Out to the Ballgame, Carlos Zambrano. And if you remember, his exit from the Cubs was just about as messy as Sammy's. There was a game he pitched in Atlanta. He went into the clubhouse, packed up all of his stuff, left, stormed out, and never pitched for the Cubs again. The Cubs forgave him. Now, I know that Carlos doesn't have the steroid cloud hanging over his head like Sammy does, and maybe that's the hang up with Tom. But I do feel that time heals all wounds, or should. And like you said, I think a meeting of the minds here, they don't have to publicize it. Tom and Sammy could meet in Miami or the Dominican or any place they want to meet quietly by themselves, hash things out, because as Pat Hughes said, and I quote Pat in the book, the great radio announcer, Hall of Famer, he said, the home runs were real when I saw them. They were real when I was describing them. The cheers from the crowds were real when they were happening. So, the Giants have brought back Barry Bonds. The Cardinals have brought back Mark McGwire at different times. So I think that it is time. Time should heal all wounds. And let's get this done sooner rather than later.
Well, what we found out, you and I were talking about this before we started to record the show, is, Jimmy Buffett. I know he wasn't a Chicago guy, but he was a Chicago guy. He cut his teeth in Chicago with Steve Goodman and John Prine writing, songs and playing and performing back in the early 70s. And then played in '84, the Star Spangled Banner, before the game one of the playoffs, and then came back and was the first act at Wrigley when they started doing concerts, and then came back after the Cubs won the World Series, and it's like, it just reminds me that life is short, and you just don't know how many days you have. And it's not that hard to forgive. We're good at it in America.
Yeah, we should be anyway. You mentioned, Jimmy Buffett. Eddie Vedder is another one. He's more of a local guy, but he's at the ballpark a lot. I've got to chat with Eddie quite a bit on occasions when he's been at the park. He was good friends with Theo Epstein. They both sat in the bleachers together during the last homestand, Theo and Eddie. So, all of these things, I think, point to that. These are larger than life figures. You're talking about Jimmy Buffett, Eddie Vedder that I mentioned, and of course, Sammy Sosa. And like you said, you'd hate to see much more time go by or something bad happen to someone where you said, you know what, we should have reached out sooner.
Yeah, we can bring him back. All right. Give us one more tidbit, and then to find out the rest of it, you got to buy the book, The Franchise, and read it with Bruce Miles and Jesse Rogers. The foreword by skipper and World Series champ David Ross. So you got them all in there.
Yeah, we do. Jesse was really good in talking with David about that. You want one more tidbit. One of the chapters in the book has been stuck in my craw for almost 40 years. And that's the notion, and it's a myth, it's a false notion, that the Cubs somehow lost home field advantage in the 1984 NLCS because Wrigley Field didn't have lights. People believe that to this day, and I correct people on that to this day. The truth of the matter is the NLCS in 1984 went off as scheduled. It was a 2-3 format that alternated year by year. What would have happened is that the Cubs would have lost home field advantage in the World Series to the Tigers had they made it in '84. That, of course, the point became moot when the Padres came back and won 3 straight at home. But it was all fair and square. It went off as it should have gone off. But for some reason over the years, this myth developed that the Cubs somehow were cheated out of a home game or home field advantage. And it boggled my mind because this was 1984. It wasn't 1884. We had TV and stuff in 1984, but somehow these myths take on a life of their own. And that's one of the later chapters in the book. And I had to get it out of my system.
All right. Well, you can get this anywhere that you pick up books, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all of them. And you got to check it out. It's the Franchise series, the Chicago Cubs with Jesse Rogers and our friend Bruce Miles. Bruce, thanks for doing this. And let's get back together sometime soon. And before we say farewell, give me your thoughts on this year's Cubs team. What do you think about the Cubs this year?
I had them left for dead when they were 10 games under 500 earlier this year. And as recently as a week or so ago, I had them winning the division. They came back really nicely. They got some players back from injury. Cody Bellinger has been very good. Dansby Swanson has come back. Some of the young pitching that they've got, Mr. Wicks and Mr. Steele, Justin Steele is a Cy Young candidate. I might vote for him if I had that vote. But I think that they're a shoo-in for the playoffs. Now, they have a tough final week. They play Atlanta and Milwaukee to finish the season, but I think they're going to get in. I had them winning the division about a week ago. I don't know if they're going to do that, but they're going to get in. And once you get in, anything can happen.
Yeah, they play Milwaukee the final 3 games, so maybe it's 82 all over again for Milwaukee. Remember when they had to play Baltimore at the end of the year? They ended up getting in anyway, but it was tough for them. They lost the first 3 games of that series. Last question, you brought up Justin Steele. I think he's going to win the Cy Young.
Oh, absolutely. What an amazing year he's had, both with the win-loss record. And I know people downplay that nowadays, but when you look at it, it still looks pretty impressive to me with the earn run average and with the whip and all of the other peripheral numbers. What I like about him is that it's taken time to develop. The Cubs stuck with him in their pitching lab. He doesn't look afraid on the mound, and neither does this kid Wicks. And I like that with young pitchers or pitchers who've suddenly come into their own. If they have a presence on the mound, I think that goes a long way towards success. So, yeah, I don't have a vote, but if I did, it would go to Mr. Steele for Cy Young. I hope he gets it, and, we'll see what happens. Maybe they give him the ball in game 1 of the playoffs.
Oh, that'd be great. Line him up with the Cy Young and then game 1, and we can talk all about how John Lester was watching him on TV and said, hey, if you do this, you might do this. But I don't think anyone thought he would win a Cy Young. Bruce, thanks for coming on, and let's do it again soon, all right?
Okay, Mick, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that's Bruce Miles. And again, you got to check out the book, The Franchise, all about the Cubs and their history. And make sure that you are part of the Cubs baseball channel. To subscribe, it is absolutely free. And we'll talk to you again real soon.